This is the 21st century. So why are people less educated in this century than they were in the last? Why is education not progressing at the same rate as technology, prosperity, and health? Well, since the Industrial Revolution, schools were created to train people to work in factories. That was their purpose, to educate the masses necessary to man the factories that arose from industrialization. And since then, the education system has not changed. It has been ingrained in students' and parents' minds that they are not responsible nor even capable of taking charge of their education. Why? Well, my hypothesis is that this happened because it was the path of least resistance. Students and parents found it easier to depend on others for their education instead of taking responsibility of it for themselves. In short, parents outsourced their children's education to entities with different standards of success than their own. These entities then began to act in their own interests instead of the interests of their students and their creators. The educational system has evolved to the point where it's attacking its students, much like HAL 9000 in 2001, A Space Odyssey, or like Skynet from the Terminator. Talking about a real educational revolution has become a huge, ugly elephant in the room. And I actually like elephants. So whether or not you accept my hypothesis regarding the current state of education, my proposal for how to move beyond this current funk is hopefully less controversial. Although I have described the current educational system as the Skynet, best practices can be harvested from my proposal. Singapore has been leading the world for years in elementary and secondary education, even though not so long ago, they were poorer and more backward than Guatemala. Did Singapore need to be a democracy to achieve these results? Did it even need to have a first world level of investment? No. Singapore was actually under a dictatorship and was less developed than Guatemala when it achieved these results. So what differentiated Singapore's outcomes from those of its peers? Well, thanks to Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, they went from a third world country to a first world country in 50 years. One of the key factors was their commitment to an educational revolution. And even though they have the best schools, they still want better. Today, in Guatemala, more than 50 years later, 90% of students do not pass the PISA D in mathematics, and more than 70% of students do not pass the minimal standard of the PISA D in reading and science. Our educational leadership posits this question as an excuse. How can we expect students to excel educationally in a country where the annual expenditure per student is $600 compared to other countries like the United States or Singapore, where the annual expenditure per student surpasses $10,000? I propose this question is nothing more than gaslighting. Singapore's experience speaks volumes. Those who refuse to talk about change, much less create a change, strive to limit our potential. It is time for us to break those chains that limit our potential, our achievement, and our imagination. Guatemala deserves it. We cannot keep looking for answers with the same institutional leadership that is gaslighting us. Those answers must come from within us. If we would follow their logic to its ultimate conclusion, then the United States would not be suffering from declining test scores, even with a first world level of investment, which increases year after year. Can these chains be broken? Yes, they can. And this I know from personal experience. My chains started breaking when I was around 5 years old. My parents went against the commonplace education system, and we started down a different path. No organization governed my education. It was just me and my parents, and I had the most to gain or to lose from my success or my failures. My mother spent countless hours researching the best educational practices from around the world, and with that, I started studying math and science with the same methods used in Singapore. And having done so, from the start of my journey, my mother taught me. But by around the age of 9, she transitioned to a role of a facilitator as I became more or less an autodidact. She would always stress the importance of education being a personal commitment. And today, almost 10 years later, I'm here offering you my nugget of wisdom. With unlimited internet access, you literally have the total sum of human knowledge in your pocket. All you need then is confidence in those who have your best interests in mind to guide you in the process of navigating it. I'm so very thankful to my parents for having given me the opportunity to learn with some of the best content from around the world. They took their education into their hands, and having done so from a very young age, I learned to do the same. And due to the flexibility afforded to me by my non-traditional schooling system, I was able to dedicate myself to other passions. For example, competitive tennis, earning a second-degree black belt in karate, playing the violin, and learning Mandarin as my third language. All this was possible because we had the audacity to trust those who had our best interests in mind. And if I can do it, so can you. And so can every single child in Guatemala. I believe they should all have the opportunity to do so. Quoting a Chinese proverb, 种一个树的最好的是建设20年前，其次是现在. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. This is the 21st century. We have everything at our fingertips. I encourage everyone who is watching, take your education into your own hands. Take your education as the most important tool you have to compete on the globalized market. Whatever path you choose to follow, take it into your hands. I believe Guatemala needs a new generation of brave, young, and educated leaders that will bring the needed change to this country, from a third world to a first world. So the question is, are you ready to break your chains? Thank you.